Chapter 15. Paris. As the train pulled into the Gare du Nord, Ambler felt both a pulsing current of anxious vigilance and a wave of nostalgia. The smell of the place, he remembered every city by its distinctive odors, brought him back with full force to the 9 months he had spent there as a youth. 9 months in which he had matured faster, so it seemed, than in the preceding 5 years. He deposited his suitcase at the left luggage office and entered the City of Light through the grand portals of the railroad station. As a safety precaution, they had traveled separately. He had flown to Brussels using identity papers Fenton provided in the name of one Robert Mulvaney, and arrived here via the hourly Dallas train. She was using a passport he had altered from one he'd hurriedly purchased on Tremont Avenue in the Bronx. The name, Lourdes Esquivel, wasn't the perfect match for the amber-eyed American, but he knew it would pass muster in a busy airport. Now he glanced at his watch and walked through the crowd at the station. Laurel was seated in a waiting area, just as they had arranged, and her eyes lit up when she saw him. His heart swelled. She was obviously tired from the trip, and yet as beautiful as he had ever seen her. As they walked together out into the Napoleon Place 3. I don't know how to pronounce it. Place Napoleon 3. The third. He watched as Laurel stared in wonder at the magnificent facade with its Corinthian columns. Those 9 statues represent the major cities of northern France, Ambler said in his best tourist guide mode. This station was built to be the gateway to the north, northern France, Belgium, Holland, even Scandinavia. It's amazing, Laurel breathed. Such words were often spoken, yet in her mouth they were not formulaic or perfunctory. They expressed her heart. As he saw the familiar sights through her own fresh eyes, they became new again. These symbolic gateways before him, they were the perfect distillation of human history. There were always those who sought to open the gates. There were always those who sought to shut them tight. Ambler in his day had done both. An hour later, he left Laurel at his favorite cafe, the Du Magot, with a large cappuccino, a blue guide, and a view, as he told her, of the oldest church in Paris. He explained that he had some business to do and would return before long. Ambler walked west at a steady pace into the 7th arrondissement. He made a few detours, checking in windows to see if he could identify anyone following him, scanned the faces he encountered. There was no sign of surveillance. Until he made his contact with Fenton's people in Paris, he could hope that no one would know he and Laurel were here. Finally, he made his way to an elegant 19th century building on the Rue Saint-Dominique and rang the bell. The Strategic Services Group logo was incised on a rectangular brass plaque on the door. He caught a momentary glimpse of a strange man reflected in it and felt a squirt of adrenaline. The next moment, he realized that the man was himself. He straightened himself and took a second look at the door. Mounted on the door frame was a glass square that had the glazed, dark look of an unpowered television screen. Ambler knew it was part of a new generation audiovisual entry system. Embedded in the silicate plane were hundreds of microlenses that captured fractional light feeds from a radial array of nearly 180 degrees. The result was a sort of compound eye, like that formed by the ommatidia of an insect. The feeds from hundreds of separate visual receptors were integrated by computer into a single mobile image, one that could be rotated and viewed from a wide range of angles. Est-ce que vous avez un rendezvous? A man's voice sounded from the speaker. My name is Robert Mulvaney, Ambler said. It was almost more comforting to have a name he knew was fake than one he could only hope was real. After a few moments, during which a computer no doubt compared his image to the digital image with which Fenton would have supplied them, Ambler was buzzed into a bland, institutional-looking foyer. A large plastic display at eye level was emblazoned with the Strategic Services Group logo. a larger version of what had been incised on the brass plaque. To a balding factotum, Ambler itemized the equipment and documents he would need, including a passport dated from a year ago, with the appropriate stamps in the name of Mary Mulvaney. The page with the photograph would be left blank with the security film unattached. Ambler would provide the photograph himself and heat seal it in place. Half an hour later, he was presented with a hard-sided briefcase. Ambler did not bother to inspect its contents. He had no doubts about the efficiency of Fenton's outfit. While his order was being filled, he had studied the updated dossier on Benoit Duchesne. He mulled over its contents as he walked back to the Dumago. 3 high-resolution pictures showed a grizzled, sharp-featured man in his mid-50s. His hair was long and lustrous, and in one of the pictures he was wearing PINCE-NEZ that made him look mildly pretentious. There were also a few pages that summarized the man's life. Duchesne, however you pronounce it, whose current address was an apartment on Rue Rambuteau, was clearly a brilliant man. He had studied nuclear physics at the École Polytechnique, the most elite scientific university in this most elitist of countries, and gone on to work at a nuclear research lab at CERN, the European Nuclear Research Center in Geneva. And then in his early 50s, about 15 years ago, he had moved back to France and joined the faculty at Paris 7 VII, where he became increasingly interested in nuclear policy. When a slot opened for nuclear arms inspector at the UN's International Atomic Energy Agency, he applied and was immediately accepted. Soon he showed himself to be unusually savvy at navigating a course through the UN's bureaucratic shoals and to have a genuine gift for administration and internal diplomacy. His rise was swift, and when he proposed for the Director General of the IAEA, he worked hard to make sure that the members of the French mission were solidly behind him. There had been some concerns, especially among senior members of the French Ministry of Defense, arising from Duchesne's youthful involvement with the Action of France of nuclear disarmament, an NGO that argued for the total abolition of nuclear weapons. When he had first joined the IAEA, the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs had questioned what they called the quote-unquote objectivity of his judgment. It was evidently a storm that he had weathered. Without the backing of his country, he would not have been considered for so illustrious and powerful a position. He was generally deemed a success. Though the IAEA Secretariat was headquartered at the Vienna International Center on Wagramer Strasse, where the agency's top career staffers were clustered, few were surprised that the Frenchman spent nearly half the year at the IAEA's Paris offices. That was the way with Frenchmen. Everyone at the UN knew that. His trips to Vienna were frequent, and he even took care to make regular appearances at the IAEA laboratories in Seibersdorf, Austria, and in Trieste, Italy. In his 3 years as Director General, he had shown a gift for sidestepping unnecessary controversy, while carefully husbanding the agency's prestige and credibility. A brief article in Time, reproduced in the dossier, called him Dr. Watchdog. According to the news magazine, he was no mere brie-eating bureaucrat, but rather a, quote, cerebral Frenchman with a heart as big as his brains, who was bringing new brio to bear on the most important threat to global security, loose nukes, end quote. Yet the public had no idea about the real story, that about a year ago the CIA had observed the IAEA Director General meeting secretly with a renegade Libyan nuclear scientist. The agency had captured enough of the conversation to deduce that Duchesne high-profile role as the world's leading anti-proliferation officer seemed to be a cover for a profitable sideline in helping non-nuclear states acquire nuclear weapons technologies. Duchesne's anti-proliferation work was a front. The anti-American invective in his early AFDN speeches was not. From Fenton, Ambler knew that the source of the information was someone senior in the American intelligence community. Certainly, the analysis had all the hallmarks of a CIA analytical report, down to the starchy phrasings, the careful qualifications, and weasel words. Evidence never, quote-unquote, proved that a conclusion was true. Rather, it, quote, raised the concern that, and quote, made plausible the supposition that, unquote, or, quote, provided additional support for, unquote, the hypothesis advanced. None of that worried Fenton. The CIA, captive to the legalistic culture of Washington, was not defending the country, but that was where Fenton figured he came in. He could do for his country what its official defenders were too cautious to do. 3/4 of an hour after he had left, Ambler was back at the Dumago. Inside, the warm air was fragrant with coffee and cigarettes. The cafe's kitchen not yet geared up for the evening meal. Laura was visibly relieved when she caught sight of him. She summoned a waiter and smiled at Ambler. He seated himself at her table, stood his briefcase by his chair, and took her hand in his, feeling its warmth. He explained about the document work. Laminating her photograph into the passport would be the work of a minute. Now that Mr. and Mrs. Mulvaney have their papers in order, we can behave like a married couple. In France, doesn't that mean you have to take a lover? Ambler smiled. Sometimes, even in France, your wife is your lover. As the two walked down the block toward a taxi stand at the corner, Ambler had a distinct sense that they were being followed. Abruptly, he turned around the corner and up an adjoining street. Laurel kept pace with him, unquestioning. The presence of a patrol was not itself cause for alarm. No doubt Fenton's people wanted to make sure that he didn't disappear again. In the next 5 minutes, Ambler and Laurel turned down several streets at random, only to find the same broad-shouldered man traipsing behind them, across the street, lagging by approximately 1/3 of a block. Increasingly, something bothered Ambler about the tale, and now he realized what it was. The man was making it too easy. He was failing to keep an appropriate distance between himself and his putative subject. Moreover, he was dressed like an American in what looked like a dark Brooks Brothers suit and a candy-striped tie, like a local assemblyman from Costco. The man wanted to be seen. That meant that he was a decoy, meant to provide spurious reassurance when he was eluded, and that Ambler had not yet identified the real tale. Doing so took several minutes longer. It was a stylish brunette in a dark mid-length coat. There was no point in losing either of them. If the tale wanted to be seen, Ambler himself wanted Fenton's people to know where he was going. He had even gone so far as to call the Hotel de Board at the SSG branch office, ostensibly confirming his reservation. Finally, he and Laurel grabbed a taxi, collected their cases from the left luggage office at the Gare du Nord, and checked into a room on the 3rd floor at the Hotel de Board. The hotel was a little dank. A slight mildewy smell emanated from the carpets, but Laurel voiced no misgivings. Ambler had to stop her before she set about unpacking. He opened the hard-sided briefcase that the balding factotum had provided him. The pieces of the TL-7 rifle he'd asked for, a collapsible CIA sniper weapon, were securely lodged in compartments slotted into stiff black foam. The Glock 26, a subcompact pistol that fired 9mm rounds, was secured in place as well. The documents he had asked for were in a side compartment. What Ambler was looking for was exactly what wasn't visible. It would take him a while to find it. First, he examined the exterior of the case carefully, making sure that there was no non-functioning applique. Then he removed the black packing foam, and with his fingertips he felt along every square inch of the case's lining. He detected nothing out of the ordinary. He tapped the handle with his fingernails and examined every inch of the stitching along the top for any sign of tampering. Finally, he turned to the black foam itself, squeezing it with his fingertips until he detected a small lump. Using a pocket knife, he prized the two layers apart until he finally uncovered what he had been searching for. The object was shiny and oval, like a vitamin pill wrapped in foil. In fact, it was a miniature GPS transponder. The tiny device was designed to signal its location, pulsing radio signals on a special frequency. As Laurel Holland stared at him in perplexity, Ambler studied the hotel room. There was a small green floral patterned sofa beneath the window, with a seat cushion above its curved ball and claw legs. He lifted the cushion and secreted the transponder beneath it. He was probably the first person to lift the cushion in a year, to judge from the scattering of coins and dust. He doubted it would be lifted for another year. Now he took the hard-sided briefcase along with his garment bag and gestured to Laurel to take her own luggage. Wordlessly, they walked out of the room. Laurel followed him as he walked past the bank of passenger elevators and around a corner to a cavernous service elevator where the flooring was grip-textured steel instead of carpeting. At the ground floor, they found themselves near a rear loading dock. It was vacant at this hour. He led the way through a wide steel push-bar door and onto a ramp that brought them to an alley. A few minutes later, they settled into another taxicab for a short ride to the Hotel Beaubourg on the Rue Simon Lefranc, a stone's throw from the Pompidou Center. It was the perfect place for American visitors interested in modern art, and just around the corner from Duchess's apartment. Once again, there was no problem getting a room. It was January. And once again, Ambler paid with cash, hard currency taken from the operative in the Sauerlands. To use the Mulvaney credit cards would be to send up a flare. The hotel was not grand. It had no restaurant, only a small breakfast area in the basement. But the bedroom had exposed oak beams on the ceiling and a comfortable bathroom with a large claw-footed tub. He felt a measure of safety, the safety that came with anonymity. He could tell that Laurel felt it too. She broke the silence first. I was going to ask you what that was all about, but I guess I kind of know. A needless precaution, let's hope. I have a feeling there's a lot you're not telling me, and I should probably be grateful for it. In an easy silence, they settled in. It was early evening after a long day, but Laurel wanted to go out for dinner. As she took a quick bath, Ambler heated the small iron that the hotel had provided and carefully laminated her photograph onto the passport. What made U.S. passports difficult to forge was simply the material with which they were made. The paper, the film, the holographic metallic strip, all of which were tightly controlled. Most likely, then, Fenton's supply was courtesy of his governmental collaborators. Laurel came out of the bathroom, covering herself shyly with her towel, and Ambler kissed her lightly on the neck. We'll have dinner and get an early night. Tomorrow we can have breakfast in one of the cafes around the corner. The man I'm looking for lives a few blocks away. She turned around and looked at him, wondering, Ambler thought, if she could ask him something that was important to her. He gave her a reassuring look. Come on, you can ask me. Anything to get that worried expression off your face. You've killed people, haven't you? Laurel asked. I mean, when you were working for the government? He nodded gravely, his own face mask-like. Is it hard to do? Was it hard to kill? That was not a question Ambler had asked himself for years. But there were related questions that did haunt him. What did it cost to kill? What did it cost in the currency of the human soul? What did it cost to him? I'm not sure how to answer that, he said softly. Laura looked abashed. I'm sorry, it's just that I've dealt with patients who seemed, well, damaged. Damaged because of the damage they inflicted on others. They didn't seem vulnerable. Most of these people had to pass extensive psych workups before they were hired in the kind of jobs they had. But it's like a piece of ceramic with a hairline crack. Nothing could seem tougher until it suddenly shatters. Is that what the Parrish Island facility was like? A box filled with shattered ceramic soldiers? She did not answer right away. Sometimes that's how it seemed. Was I one of them? Shattered? No, not shattered. Bruised, maybe. Like they tried to crush you, but you just wouldn't crush. It's hard to put in words. She looked into his eyes. But in your career, you've had to do things that must have been hard to do. I had a cons ops instructor who used to say that there are really two worlds. They began slowly, softly. There is the world of the operative, and it's the world of murder and mayhem and all the skullduggery you could imagine. It's a world of boredom, too, the endless tedium of waiting and planning, of contingencies that never come into play, of traps that never spring. But the brutality is real, too, no less real for being so casual. It all seems so heartless, so cold. There was a catch in her voice. And there's another world, Laurel. It's the normal world, the everyday world. It's the place where people get up in the morning to do an honest day's work and angle for their promotions or go shopping for a son's birthday present and change long-distance plans so they can call their daughter at college for less. That's the world where you sniff the fruits at the supermarket to see whether they're ripe and look up a recipe for orange roughy because they had that on special and worry about arriving late for a grandchild's communion. He paused. And the thing is that sometimes these worlds intersect. Suppose a man is prepared to sell technology that can be used to kill hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people. The safety of the normal world, the world of everyday people, depends on making sure the bad guys don't succeed. Sometimes that means taking extraordinary measures. Extraordinary measures, she said. You make it sound like medicine. Maybe it is a kind of medicine. It's more like medicine than it is like police work anyway. Because at the shop I worked for, there was a simple creed. If we operated by the policeman's rules, we would lose ground we can't afford to lose. We'd lose the war. And there was a war. Beneath the surface of every major city in the world, Moscow, Istanbul, Tehran, Seoul, Paris, London, Beijing, there were battles going on every minute of every day. If things work the way they're supposed to, people like me spend their lives working for people like you by keeping that battle from erupting into view. Ambler stopped. So many other questions remained unanswered, perhaps unanswerable. Was Benoit Deschesnes a part of this war? Could he in fact kill this man? Should he? If Fenton's intelligence was correct, Benoit Deschesnes was betraying not just his own country, not just the United Nations, but all the people whose lives would be threatened by nuclear weapons in the hands of tin pot dictators. Laura broke the silence. And if they don't work the way they're supposed to, then the great game becomes just that, another game, only a game played with human lives. You still believe this, Laurel prodded. I don't know what I believe anymore, he said. At this point, I feel like a cartoon animal who's run off a cliff, and if he doesn't keep pumping his legs in midair, he'll plunge to the bottom. You feel angry, she said, and lost. He nodded. That's how I feel, she said. And it was almost as if she were thinking aloud. Except I feel something else too. I feel like I've got a sense of purpose now. Absolutely nothing makes sense, and for the first time in my life, it's like everything makes sense. Because stuff's broken, and it has to get fixed, and if we don't do it, nobody will. She broke off. Don't listen to me, I don't even know what I'm saying. And I don't even know who I am. We're a swell pair. He sought out her eyes with his, and together they shared a small smile. Pump those legs, Laurel said. Don't look down, look forward. You came here for a reason. Don't forget it. For a reason. The right one, he hoped to God. After a while, they decided to go out for fresh air and walked into the open plaza of the Pompidou Center. Laura was delighted by the building, a great glass monster with its innards on the outside. As they moved toward it, with people bustling by in the winter cold, her mood seemed to lift. It's like a giant box of light floating over the square, a huge kid's toy with all those brightly colored tubes around it. She paused. It's not like anything I've ever seen before. Let's walk around it. Sure. Ambler took pleasure in her delight, but he was grateful, too, for the opportunity to use the endless windows to search for any reflections of the man in the Brooks Brothers suit and the woman in the mid-length coat. This time, though, they were nowhere to be seen. There was only one moment when Ambler heard the belling of an internal TOCSIN. I don't know what that word is. The reflection of a man, fleetingly glimpsed, short-haired, features that were handsome but almost cruel, eyes that searched too hard, too insistently, too desperately. It was not entirely reassuring when he realized that the man he had glimpsed was himself. At 7:30 the next morning, the American couple greeted the desk clerk with a cheerful bonjour. The clerk tried to direct them to the breakfast room in the basement, but Ambler begged off, explaining that they were going to have un vrai petit déjeuner américain. They set off for the cafe around the corner on the Rue Rambuteau that he had identified the previous evening. Once they had settled in at a table with a view onto the street, Ambler made sure he could see the entrance to the apartment building at 120. Then the watching began. They had slept well. Now she looked lively and refreshed, ready for whatever awaited them. They ordered a large meal at the Café St. Jean, croissants, a couple of poached eggs, orange juice, coffee. Ambler stepped out for a moment to grab a copy of the International Herald Tribune from a news vendor. We may be here a while, Ambler said quietly. No need to rush. Laurel nodded and opened the front section of the Tribune on the wrought iron table. The news of the world, she said. But which world, I wonder? Which of those two worlds you told me about? He glanced at the headlines. Various business and political leaders were addressing the annual meeting of the World Economic Forum at Davos, Switzerland. Their platforms and entreaties dutifully noted and analyzed. A strike had hit Fiat, crippling production at the automaker's Turin plants. A bomb had gone off during a religious festival in Kashmir. Hindu extremists blamed. Talks failed in Cyprus. The more things change, Ambler reflected mordantly. As it turned out, they did not have to stay long. Chestnut appeared at about 8 o'clock, briefcase in hand, and scanned the street for a few moments before he entered a black limousine that had arrived for him. Ambler, obscured by the sun's glare on the cafe window, stared intently at that face, yet it had told him little. Sorry, honey, Ambler said loudly. I guess I left my guidebook at the hotel. You go ahead and eat your breakfast, and I'll go get it. Laurel, who had not seen the pictures of chestnuts, looked puzzled for a moment, but just a moment. Then she beamed at him. Why, thank you, honey. That is so sweet. She was almost enjoying this, Ambler thought. He handed her a shopping list, items of clothing that would come in handy, and he was off. A couple of minutes later, Ambler went into the Rambuteau metro station. Chestnut had to be headed for the office. Nothing in his expression indicated that this day would be out of the ordinary, and Ambler took the metro to the École Militaire station. He got out near the regional office of the IAEA, which was located in a hulking modernist building on the Place de Fontenoy, a demi-lune of a street off the Avenue de Lowendahl, at the opposite end of the Parc du Champ de Mars from the Eiffel Tower. The surroundings were scenic. The building itself was not, largely given over to the office requirements of UNESCO. The building was ringed by a steel fence and had the forbidding aura of mid-century modernism, a configuration of girder, stone, and glass designed not to welcome but to intimidate. Ambler turned himself into a birdwatcher at the square Combron, gazing about with compact field glasses, occasionally feeding pigeons with the crumbs of a pastry acquired from a street vendor. Despite his idle and distrait, I don't know what that word is, D-I-S-T-R-A-I-T, air, not one person left 7 Place du Fontenoy without his noticing. At 1 o'clock, Chestnut strode out of the building, a purposeful look on his face. Was he off to have lunch at one of the restaurants nearby? In fact, he entered the École Militaire metro station, a peculiar move for the Director General of a powerful international agency. Chestnut, Ambler suspected, was someone who was usually accompanied by an entourage, visiting dignitaries, staffers, colleagues in need of a moment of his time, and who usually traveled in style. His UN office made him a personage as well as a person. When someone of that eminence disappeared into the subway system, it carried a suggestion of subterfuge. Ambler thought back to the man's face across the street that morning. There was no evidence of particular stress, of his being mindful of a hazardous rendezvous. Ambler trailed him as the UN administrator made his way south to Boucicaut. Trailed him as he emerged at that station, strode to the end of the block, made a left, and in the middle of a quiet residential street lined with classic Parisian manses, took out his keyring and let himself into one. It was then a rather early version of that classic form of French liaison, the 5 à 7. What Chestnut was up to involved both subterfuge and routine. He was conducting an assignation, an affair, doubtless one of long standing. Across the street, Ambler took out his field glasses and peered at the windows of the drab building of weather-stained limestone. A flicker of light at a curtained window on the 4th floor told him that it was the apartment Chestnut had entered. He glanced at his watch. It was 20 after 1. He saw Chestnut's figure shadowed against the unlined curtains. He was alone. His mistress was probably a professional woman and had not yet arrived. Maybe she would arrive at 1:30, and Chestnut would busy himself with his ablutions until then. There were too many maybes. Ambler's instincts told him to intercept Chestnut now. He felt the small Glock 26, which fit comfortably and invisibly in a waistband holster. He had noticed a florist at the corner. A few minutes later, he buzzed the 4th floor apartment, a bouquet of elegantly wrapped flowers in hand. Oui, a voice said a moment or two later. Even through the crackly interference on the loudspeaker, Ambler could hear the wariness in Chestnut's tone. Les raisons de quoi? Chestnut demanded. De fleurs? De qui? Ambler kept his voice bored, impassive. Monsieur, I think it's French. These are flowers for Mr. Benoit de Chestnut. Si vous ne voulez pas. No. The buzzer sounded. French. Ambler was in. The building was in poor repair, the steps worn smooth from decades of hard-soled shoes, the banister broken in a couple of places. It was not the kind of building that either Chestnut or his lover would have chosen as a residence. Ambler was sure, but it was easily afforded, a pied-à-terre whose expense would not noticeably affect the household budget of either. When Chestnut came to the door, he saw a man in a respectable winter coat holding out a bunch of flowers with his left hand. Ambler hardly looked like a delivery man, but his open, pleasant smile reassured the Frenchman, and he opened the door wider to take the bouquet. Ambler dropped the bouquet and extended his right foot into the door. His right hand was holding the Glock aimed at the Frenchman's abdomen. The Frenchman cried out and, rearing back, tried to slam the heavy wooden door. At the same time, Ambler lunged forward, shoulder first, and the door slammed futilely against the doorstep. The Frenchman had been hurled back several feet, his face drained of color. Ambler could see him desperately scanning the room behind him for some potential weapon or shield. Moving swiftly, Ambler closed the door behind him, securing the door chain and deadbolt with his free hand. They would not be disturbed. Now he stepped toward Chestnut, forcing him back into the sitting room. "Be quiet, or I will use this," Ambler said in English. He had to project an aura of overwhelming force. As he had thought, Chestnut was alone. The winter sunlight was beaming through the large window opposite the door and casting a silvery glow onto a sparsely furnished living room. There was a bookshelf with a few books, a coffee table covered with newspapers, typescripts, and magazines. It had been an advantage before that the whole room was visible from the street. Now it was a disadvantage. "Bedroom?" Ambler asked. The Chestnut jerked his head to the left toward a doorway, and Ambler marched him across to it. "You're alone?" Ambler asked as he scanned the bedroom. Chestnut nodded. He was telling the truth. The man before Ambler was large-framed but soft, with the expanding girth of too many expensive meals, too little exercise. Fenton's workup had described a man who was truly a force for evil in the world. "Take care of Benoit and you'll be the equivalent of a made man. Then we'll talk." If Fenton was correct, the UN dignitary deserved death, and by arranging that death, Ambler could infiltrate into the very heart of Fenton's enterprise. He would obtain the knowledge he sought, and he would learn who he really was and was not. The bedroom had opaque roller shades, and Ambler, keeping the physicist within his sights, pulled the blinds down. He sat on the arm of a sofa by the window, piled up untidily with clothes. "Sit," he said, pointing the gun at the bed. Then he sat still for a moment, staring intently at Chestnut. With slow movements, the Frenchman withdrew his billfold from his pocket. "Put that away," Ambler said. Chestnut froze, his fear compounded with confusion. "I'm told your English is pretty good," Ambler went on, but if you don't understand anything I say, just tell me." "Why are you here?" These were just Chestnut's first words. "Didn't you know this day would come?" Ambler said quietly. "I see," Chestnut said. A sorrowful look came over him. He sat down as if winded. "Then you are Gilbert. It's funny, but I always assumed you were French. She never told me you were not. Not that we ever talked about you. I do know that she loves you, that she has always loved you. Joelle, she was always upfront about this. What we have is a different thing. It is not serious. I don't expect you to excuse or forgive, but I must tell you, Monsieur Chestnut," Ambler broke in, "I have no connection to Joelle. This has nothing to do with your personal life." "But then it has everything to do with your professional life, your covert professional life. Those are the true liaisons, dangerous liaisons. I refer to your connections with those whose hearts are set on nuclear weaponry, those you are too eager to please." A look of pure bewilderment appeared on Chestnut's face, the kind of bewilderment it was extremely difficult to fake. Was it that his English was limited? It seemed utterly fluent, but perhaps his comprehension was imperfect. French. I think the same sentence, but in French, Ambler said, enunciating clearly. Chestnut replied in English. My role in nuclear proliferation is a matter of public record. I have spent a career working against it. He broke off suddenly, wary. A ruffian invades a residence of mine and holds me at gunpoint, and I'm supposed to talk about my vocation? Who sent you? What in God's name is this about? Call it a performance review. Speak to the point or you'll never speak again. No games, no second guessing. Chestnut's eyes narrowed. Did Actions de France send you? He asked, referring to the organization of anti-nuclear activists. Do you people realize how incredibly counterproductive this is, acting as if I am the enemy? Speak to the point, Ambler barked. Tell me about your meeting with Dr. Abdullah Alamodi in Geneva last spring. The UN eminence looked bewildered. What are you talking about? I'm asking the questions here, goddammit. Are you pretending you don't know who Dr. Alamodi is? Certainly I know who he is, the Frenchman returned with wounded dignity. You referred to a Libyan physicist who is on our watch list. We believe him to be involved in a secret weapons program involving various Arab League nations. Then why would the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency be meeting with such a person? Why, indeed, Chestnut spluttered. Alamodi would no more be caught in the same room as me than a mouse would curl up with a cat. Ambler detected no trace of deception. And how do you explain your trip to Harare last year? I cannot, the UN eminence said simply. Now we're getting somewhere. Because I have never been to Harare. Ambler stared at him intently. Never? Never, the man said stoutly. Where are you getting this information? Who has supplied you with such lies? I should like to know. He paused. It was Action de France, wasn't it? A crafty look crept over his face. They served a useful role once. Now they consider me a turncoat. They doubt everything they see, everything they hear. The truth is, if they wanted to know where I stood, what I did, they could read the newspapers or turn on the radio. Words and deeds do not always match. Exactement, this Chestnut said. You tell your friends at Action de France that they would do more good if they put honest pressure on our elected officials. I'm not with Action de France, Ambler returned steadily. Chestnut's gaze returned to Ambler's handgun. No, he said after a while, of course not. Those xenophobes would never entrust anything important to an American. Then you are CIA? I suppose their intelligence is just bad enough to explain such a blunder. Ambler could tell Chestnut was struggling between his indignation and his desire to calm an intruder who was holding him at gunpoint in his pied-à-terre. Volubility and indignation seemed to gain the upper hand. Perhaps you should give your employers a message directly from me. Fill their intelligence dossiers with the truth for a change, because the truth is that the great nations of the West have been criminally negligent on the greatest threat the world now faces, and America isn't the exception, it's the prime culprit. I don't recall your speaking with such candor before the members of the UN Security Council, Ambler taunted. My UN reports spell out the facts. I leave the rhetoric for others. But the bare facts are shaming enough. North Korea has enough plutonium for several nuclear warheads. Iran does as well. More than 20 other states have so-called research reactors with ample, highly enriched uranium to build their own nuclear bombs. And of those bombs that already exist, hundreds are stored in conditions of risible, R-I-S-I-B-L-E, security. A silk blouse at a Samaritan department store is better secured than many Russian nuclear warheads. It's a moral obscenity. The world should be terrified, and yet you people could care less. The UN eminence was breathing hard, voicing the fury that had driven his career. his early fear and confusion almost forgotten as he spoke. Ambler was shaken. He could no longer doubt the man's sincerity, now without doubting his own perceptions. Someone had set Chestnut up. Yet at what remove? Fenton betrayed not the slightest doubt about the source integrity behind the assignment. How far up or down did the intrigue go, and what motivated it? Ambler needed to know who, and he needed to know why, but the Frenchman was little help here. Now, from the window, Ambler saw a small black-haired woman approach the entrance from the street. Joelle, no doubt. "Is there anyone home in the apartment upstairs?" Ambler demanded. "The neighbors all worked," Chestnut said. "There is never anyone home before 6, but what does that matter? I do not have the key, and Joelle—" "I'm afraid we haven't finished our conversation," Ambler said. "I would prefer not to involve Joelle, if you agree." Chestnut nodded, ashen. Pistol still in hand, Ambler followed the Frenchman as he made his way to the floor above. The door was indeed locked, but that was hardly more than a formality. Ambler had observed how flimsy the knob latches were in the building, shallow brass tongues mounted in decaying wood. With a sudden movement, he slammed his hip into the door. It gave in with a small explosion of splintered wood, and the two walked inside. Below, Joelle would have been approaching the bottom landing. She would be puzzled that Chestnut had failed to show, but there were many possible explanations. Ambler would leave it to Chestnut to settle on one. The fifth-floor apartment looked scarcely inhabited. There was an oval rug of jute, Jute, a few battered items of furniture that would not have made the grade at a flea market, but it would suffice. At Ambler's insistence, the two spoke in hushed voices. "Let's stipulate," Ambler said, "that I have indeed been supplied with false information, that you have enemies who mean to set you up. Then the question for us is, why?" "The question for me is why you don't get the hell out of my life," Chestnut replied, in a gust of cold fury. He had decided he was no longer in immediate danger of being shot. "The question for me is why you insist on waving that gun in my face. You want to know who my enemies are? Then look in the mirror, you American cowboy. You are my enemy." "I'll put the gun away," Ambler said. As he did so, he added, "but it won't make you any safer." "I don't understand." "Because there are many more where I come from." Chestnut blanched. "And you are from where?" "It's not important. What's important is that powerful officials have been assured that you pose a major risk to international security." Again, why would that be? Chestnut shook his head. "I can't think of any reason why," he finally said. "As the Director General of the IAEA, I am something of a symbol of international resolve on this issue, leaving aside the fact that this resolve is too often merely symbolic. My views about the nuclear menace are common sense, shared by millions of people and thousands of physicists. But surely some of your work isn't public. Surely some of it involves confidential dealings. We do not release provisional findings as a rule, but almost all of it is destined to become public when the time is right." He paused. "The main unreleased work I am doing now is on a report on the Chinese role in proliferation." "What have you found?" "Nothing." "What do you mean, nothing?" Ambler walked over to the window, watched as the petite brunette walked hesitantly from the building and back to the sidewalk. She would have questions. They would be answered later. "Despite what the American government says, and the French government says, and NATO says, there is no evidence at all that China is currently involved in proliferation. Liu Ang has, from everything we have been able to determine, strongly abjured the spread of atomic technology. The only question is whether he will be able to keep the Chinese military under control." "How many people are working on this report?" just a handful of staffers in Paris and Vienna, though we are processing information from a large team of arms inspectors and analysts. But I am the principal author. I alone am in a position to confer on it the complete credibility of my office. Ambler felt his frustration rising. Chestnut may have been an innocent man, but he was also, and by the same token, an irrelevant man. He was just another aging Frenchman, one of dubious private morality, perhaps, but undoubted public probity. Yet there had to be a reason for someone or some group to have ordered his death, and if Ambler did not fulfill the assignment, others would not hesitate to do so. Ambler squeezed his eyes shut for a moment and then saw what he had to do. Vous êtes-vous absolument fou? Was Chestnut's first response when Ambler explained the situation. Perhaps, Ambler replied placidly. He knew he had to get the Frenchman's confidence, but consider. The people who sent me are serious. They have the resources. If I don't kill you, they'll send someone else. But if we can persuade them you're dead and you can disappear for a while, I have a chance of finding out who set you up. It's the only way you'll be safe. Chestnut stared at him. Insanity. He stopped. And exactly how could such a thing be done? I'll contact you in a few hours when I've worked out the details, Ambler replied. Is there a place you can retreat to for a week or so? A place you won't be found? My wife and I have a place in the country. Near Cahors? Ambler broke in impatiently. They know that. You can't go there. Joel's family has a place near Dreux. They never go there in the winter. He stopped. No, I can't involve her. I won't involve her. Listen to me, Ambler said after a long pause. It shouldn't take me more than a week or two to deal with this. I suggest you rent a car. Don't use your own. Drive south and stay somewhere in Provence for a couple of weeks. If the plan works, they won't be looking for you. Send me a phone number at this email address. Ambler wrote it on a piece of paper for him. I'll call you when it's safe. And what if you don't call? Then I'll be dead, Ambler thought. I'll call, he said. He smiled coolly. You have my word.